Good afternoon. Welcome to the Atlantic Council and to today's event on Aviation Cybersecurity, Scoping the Challenge. My name is Matthew Kranig. I'm the Deputy Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Scowcroft Center seeks to honor General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service by developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important issues facing the United States and its allies. The Cyber Statecraft Initiative, housed within the Scowcroft Center, works at the nexus of geopolitics and cybersecurity, also developing strategies to deal with important cybersecurity issues. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to the director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, Trey Herr. But before I do that, I just want to thank the sponsors of this study, Thales. Thank you very much for your support. For those of you who would like to join us online on Twitter, including those of you watching online, you can use the hashtag #AviationCyber and the handle @CyberStatecraft. So please join the conversation online. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Trey Herr.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. We have a packed room for those of you that are watching online, although I suspect quite a few of you have logged in as well. The Cyber Statecraft Initiative is a group that's attempting to understand policy at the nexus of geopolitics and technology. That's a very rough fit. When you add people to the mix, it complicates the situation that much more so. What I have found really breathtaking about this work, I think that Pete and the group have done, and this report in particular, are it attempts to capture this complex environment not by wrapping it all up into a single talking point, but addressing these silos and trying to treat them with the respect that they deserve, both for being significant security issues, but also really significant organizational challenges. None of the problems that are going to get discussed here today are easy. None of the solutions are simple or low cost. And so the opportunity to be able to focus in on this one sector and deal with this set of issues, this illustrious panel that we have here today, I think is an unusual opportunity, and it's certainly a germane one for this topic and for this time. So just briefly, I want to introduce the agenda to you and then talk a bit about our keynote speaker. First, you're going to hear from Mr. Alan Pellegrini, who is the CEO of Thales North America and a board director here at the Atlantic Council. Second, following Mr. Pellegrini's remarks, you're going to hear Mr. Pete Cooper talk through the actual aviation survey that formed the basis of this report. Then we're going to have a fireside chat with Mr. Will Roper, who's Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, also led by our senior fellow here, Pete Cooper. And final, a moderated panel discussion. The group will be introduced by Pete, but we would encourage you to be thinking about questions as people are discussing and debating up here on stage. We'll have time for Q&A before we move to the reception. Following me up on stage is going to be Mr. Pellegrini, and to give you just a bit of a sense of his background, Mr. Pellegrini is the CEO of Thales North America. He was appointed the position in 2017 and oversees business operations in Canada and the United States. Something that we wanted to highlight, because since it gets instructive for the kind of support that Thales has provided for this work. Since Mr. Pellegrini's accession to CEO of Thales USA in 2013, he's overseen 3 separate acquisitions focused on computing, connectivity, and cybersecurity as a way to diversify the technology base and focus Thales' operations in this space. Aviation and cybersecurity are deeply intertwined concepts. We make the joke that there really are very few hardware companies anymore. Everyone is a software company, and I think that speaks well to Thales that they have seen and had the foresight to be able to support this kind of work. So without any further ado, I want to welcome up Mr. Pellegrini and have you all join me in thanking him for today.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. Hope you can hear me okay. If you're not familiar with these readers, if you're not old enough, you will be. They're great. Not very expensive either. So let me kick things off, and I really welcome the opportunity to do so. Really appreciate that you all joined today. I mean, it's great participation. Great to see Dr. Roper here. Excellent panel that's coming up. So please stick around for that. I think you're going to find that extremely interesting. Just a little more on introduction. My name is Alan Pellegrini. I am the CEO of Thales North America, CEO of Thales USA from 2013 forward, and we extended that to include the rest of the continent. If you don't know Thales, we are a pretty large company, 80,000 people, about $20 billion in top-line annual revenues. We are a high-technology solutions company. We like to say we address some of the world's biggest challenges, mission-critical types of issues in a number of industries, aerospace, defense, transportation, and security, both physical and cybersecurity. So we build satellites and the payloads on them. We build the electronics that fly the aircraft that you all fly on. We build entertainment and connectivity systems that connect you as passengers in the cabin. We secure, through cybersecurity, the majority of the world's financial transactions. We provide biometrics that help us get through airports now quicker and quicker. And of course, we also support our troops and those of our allies with communications, sensors, and other systems level solutions. Ultimately, we like to say at Thales that our purpose is really to create trust in a complex and uncertain world. And that, I think, is really critical to why we are here today and joined with the Atlantic Council, because we, like all of you, care deeply about the safety and security of aviation in this increasingly digitized environment. And given our role in industry in both aviation and security, this topic is really foundational for Thales. So let me continue by kind of setting the scene and rewinding the clock slightly. You know, for several years now, you're all very much aware, new technologies have really been reshaping the aviation environment. And it was probably around 2016, 2017, we saw this trend just becoming universal. All aspects of aviation were becoming increasingly digital and increasingly connected, connecting passengers to the internet on aircraft, digitizing and connecting pilots to air traffic controllers, greater use of satellites for navigation and communication. And with these increasing capabilities, which were all great and provided benefits, we of course also recognize there were increasing levels of vulnerabilities, especially to cyber attack. And that's why we chose to engage a few years ago with the Atlantic Council as a neutral kind of third party to really examine what is the state of aviation cybersecurity and how can you help us drive a conversation. And their groundbreaking report, led by Pete, looked really holistically at the major elements that made up the ecosystem, from the aircraft and the airports and the airlines and air traffic control on military as well. And what the council found in the original report was really an aviation ecosystem that, when it came to cybersecurity, was very fragmented. It's not that nobody was working on the challenges that existed. It's just that in a lot of ways we were all working on them independently. It had become a siloed as opposed to a systematic approach to addressing a very important safety topic of how could aircraft be impacted by cyber topics. So with our help as sponsors to the 2017 report, we, along in the Atlantic Council, were able to help the community, I think, see the benefits of collaboration to really address this essential topic. So let me talk about since then, because since then, 2017, I think we've seen some good examples of progress that we can at least partially attribute to that report. Recently, the executive director of the Aviation Information Sharing and Analysis Center, better known as AISAC, told us that as a direct result of the Council's 2017 report, they began to redefine and relook at the organization's mission to think beyond just aircraft with a focus on cyber. We think that's really important because this move created a day-to-day forum for collaboration across the aviation sector and really opening access to other stakeholders that needed to be part of this important discussion. Now, another, we think, great result of the 2017 study was the enacting or creation of an aviation and aerospace village at the DEFCON conference, which is held every year in Las Vegas. I don't know how many of you attend that show, but it's one of the world's biggest hackers convention in an ethical way. And I'm sure Pete Cooper will talk more about it, so I don't want to spoil some of that. But let's just say we firmly believe that ethical hackers are an important part of this community to help us identify and address these vulnerabilities and ultimately create a more resilient set of solutions for the aerospace world. This event will take place again this year. Thales will certainly be front and center with it. So, let me just give you one more example of how Thales wants to try to be a pace setter and set the example as we continue to ensure focus on this industry. We've now set up a security operations center dedicated to aviation at one of our facilities in Orlando, Florida. So with that facility, we're now able to monitor our communication to and from aircraft in order to try to detect any anomalies, to try to quickly assess what these alerts are telling us, and to try to quickly mitigate them as much as possible. We think that's a best practice, which we hope will proliferate through the industry. So while the initial Atlantic Council report helps stimulate possible positive engagement across the ecosystem, my view is we can't let that slow down. We can't relax. We need to continue to put emphasis on this essential safety topic. Hence, it was our desire to really help sponsor this second report, to kind of put a renewed emphasis and a renewed call to action on this important activity. Why? Because the threats persist. On a regular basis, we hear of ongoing cyber attacks or threats, whether it's in the airport environment, in the aircraft environment, or other aspects of our ecosystem. Without being specific on any of them, let me just say that we're very thankful that there's a lot of very ethical individuals that are interested and want to help, and who alert us and others in this industry to these topics so that we can immediately address them. So let me close my remarks with again, kind of a renewed call to action. I'm sure there's many more examples you'll hear today that will be shared about the potential cyber risks and the positive actions that have been happening these last few years. Obviously, we're very proud at Thales to be part of this discussion and to help sponsor the Atlantic Council's work. We like to say, it's the time for saying, hey, we have a problem in this area to be worried about is over. We have to continue to move to really progress a continuous engagement among us and collective actions going forward. So with the launch of this new report today, we really hope to continue to accelerate this type of engagement. So thanks for indulging me with a few minutes to kind of set the stage for today. I'm very much looking forward to hearing Dr. Roper's comments and the panel that will follow. So thank you. I really hope you enjoy and engage this afternoon. Thanks.
Evening, everybody. Firstly, I just want to say thank you very much to both the Atlantic Council and Alan and the team at Thales for supporting this. As he said, this is a huge challenge, but also opportunity, not just across the US and Europe, but also internationally and globally. I'm Pete Cooper. I'm an independent cyber strategy advisor and also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council within the Scowcroft Centre. And this is really about this isn't about one report. This is about a journey that I think the whole industry and the sector are coming on. And there's a lot of people to thank, be supporters, collaborators, fellow subversives. This isn't about talking about the challenges. This is about actively driving and improving some of those challenges and bringing those stakeholders together so that the whole industry can help keep itself safe and secure all the way through. So, as we talked about, this journey really started 2 years ago with the publication of the first report. When I did all the research for that and then talked across the sector, what really stood out was the diversity of voices out there, was the diversity of perspectives around risk, and was the diversity of viewpoints about what that challenge really was. And we'll talk about some of those in a second. And every time we sort of lifted a rock to find some challenges, we found 2 or 3 other challenges under each rock. So there was a lot of challenges to unpick as we went through. So that's really the aim and objectives of this report, which is to use a survey to really try and unpick some of those different diverse questions and challenges that were highlighted from the initial report and over the last couple of years. And then we've done some really amazing workshops and interviews to really add some depth into what we've been looking at. And there's been some huge changes. One of the key findings that we discussed 2 years ago was that the aviation sector is really lucky to have an engaged organisation such as ICAO looking at the security of the entire sector and working that globally. And we really discussed that actually to start driving on in a coherent manner the Aviation Cybersecurity Challenge, we really needed an ICAO cybersecurity strategy. And it's amazing that back in October, that was signed off by the Secretary General. So if you think about the journey we've come on in just under 2 years, it's been amazing progress. And if we look at the definition or the vision of what ICAO are looking at, it's being resilient to cyber attacks. This is not about absolute security. All of the other sectors are learning that this is about resilience. And the aviation sector, we've got to drive them down the same road. Safe and trusted globally, that's really what all of us want when it comes to aviation. But at the same time, not having cybersecurity being seen as a drag on innovation or growth. Because if we're to make aviation cybersecurity seen as something which happens naturally as the culture of the industry, then actually we've got to allow that growth and innovation to still take place. So it's amazing that we've got this in place, and that feels like a huge step. So what we did was we took some of those challenges and those diverse voices from 2 years ago and over the last couple of years to really try and spark discussion, debate and dialogue to see what the progress was across survey, workshops and interviews, and really try and triangulate all of those different voices. As Alan already mentioned, this isn't about one solution or one voice. If we want to get to that real ground truth and enact and proper strategic change, we need to understand all of those voices if we are to move forwards. And that's what we've done. Because this is against the backdrop of some huge changes across the sector. We've got huge efforts globally, internationally, nationally, and also across the sector and the sector itself from a manufacturing perspective and operator perspective to try and make the industry more secure. But against the backdrop of digitization, connectivity, challenges such as 5G, where we've got connectivity at chip level, increased wireless capabilities across airports, aircraft, air traffic management, and then moving into much more reliance on space, the industry is facing some really key challenges. So there's great work going on, but the challenges still remain. So one of the key voices, one of the key things that came out of the initial report was this perspective that when we engaged with some of the community, it was the answer we got back was, well, it's just not possible to hack an aviation system. Then you don't have to worry about it. So that was one of the first questions that we asked people is, what's the perspective on aviation systems? Is it true that it's not possible to hack aviation systems? And really what we got back from the community, actually, that we have got a challenge here. And we're not saying that this is an insurmountable challenge, but the aviation sector is using much of the same technology as lots of other sectors. So it behoves us to actually start thinking about the risk reality that we're facing and how we actually drive that resilience. And a lot of the research that we had from this year really showed that we still have a challenge in trying to understand what those shared risk perspectives look like. We still have a challenge in making sure that the leadership understand what their risk looks like, both internally and externally, and how those partners work together, and how we can break down the stovepipes between the security organizations and the safety organizations and also cybersecurity. And there's a lot more work that we need to do to try and get all of those stakeholder groups working and talking together. And to gain insight to some of that risk, if we think about the amount of data, mood lighting. If we think about the amount of data that the aviation industry is now generating from a lot of that digitization, then to try and understand the scale of that challenge from a cybersecurity perspective, we really wanted to dig into, are we able to capture, adequately protect and analyze that data from a cybersecurity perspective? And really what we got back from the feedback is actually there's a lot more again that we can do to start analyzing some of that data, because if we think about from a safety perspective, if we were looking to investigate accidents or incidents, we put a lot of effort in to try and recreate what happened so we can make sound decisions about trying to prevent that from happening in the future. From a cybersecurity perspective, a lot of the feedback was we don't have access to enough of that data to really understand what that looks like yet. And when it also comes down to trying to understand some of that risk, from a safety perspective, one of the key enshrined things across the aviation sector is making sure we have objectivity. From face value, we never really accept that a statement of how safe something is we always check it through objective, independent analysis. And one of the questions that we had for the community was, is there value at looking at this from a cybersecurity perspective as well? Do we need to have that objectivity of analysis and risk? And again, this is one of the key strong messages that came out, was that actually there is huge value in increasing the amount of objectivity we've got in this space. And that really feeds on some of the parallels across the aviation sector, where when we're looking to increase cybersecurity of the sector, we can take some of the best practices of the sector and actually bring cybersecurity into the fore in those practices. And one of the key things that's been really close to my heart for the last 2 years is, across all of those different diverse stakeholders, irrespective of their background, irrespective of who they work for and what their objectives are, if they're positively trying to help the sector be safer and more secure and reduce vulnerabilities, how do we build bridges between them? And one of the key things that we really discovered was that the relationship between the sector and the research community and the good faith research community could sometimes be quite tense and on the verge of antagonistic. So how could we start building bridges across that so that it's a positive engagement? So we start finding and fixing vulnerability faster. And that reduces the friction, so we keep starting to get ahead of our adversaries. So it's nice to see things like increased use of coordinated vulnerability disclosures, and kudos, for example, to Boeing, who rolled theirs out literally a month and a half ago. So we are really starting to see some good progress across the industry, which is fantastic. And then finally, when we started talking about regulations and standards, there are regulations and standards out there for aviation cybersecurity. But one of the key questions out to the community was, are they effective? And what we started getting back from the community was that they felt that they might not be. Now, there's a lot of work going on in a lot of these standards. So what is it that is causing them not potentially to land or be considered as effective? Because fundamentally, this is about finding a global balance. This isn't about improving the aviation cybersecurity of the US or Europe. This is a global industry that's dependent on global partnerships and actually shared risk. So as we look at increasing cybersecurity and increasing cybersecurity culture, we've got to learn how we can do that in as much the developing nation as we are the developed nations. Whether we do that through principles and standards, and whether we do that through generating that capacity through increased workforce, which will be a key challenge for the industry going forwards, needs to be one of the key discussions in the next following years. And one of the questions that came up that actually is showing where the industry has some really potential to make some huge impact is passenger privacy and security is something that isn't normally really talked about very much. But if we start to look at the dialogue, some of the dialogue that we've had on things like biometrics and passenger privacy and data privacy, there's a real opportunity for the industry to get ahead of that conversation, to drive positive dialogue, so we don't risk a potential pushback in the future. So going forwards, there's some huge opportunities to increase dialogue and increase coherency across all of those different stakeholders and build bridges. Initiatives such as the Aviation Village at DEFCON, industry initiatives such as the ISAC and the work that's going on at ICAO are all huge opportunities to build those critical bridges if we're to better understand risk across all of us for a secure and resilient industry, and then inspire that next generation of workforce to come forwards. Because the industry absolutely needs that next generation, and we need to be able to help show them the way forwards. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that we found in the report. And then over the next hour and a half, we've got some fantastic speakers that are going to start unpicking that. So without any further ado, I'm going to please invite up onto the stage, and I'm honoured to have him here, is Dr. Will Roper, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, and has been a fellow, I think the word is co-conspirator?
Something like that.
Thank you. Lights are dramatic. So, for those of you that sort of just to give a bit of an insight to Dr. Roper, I think the first time we met was in DEFCON, and you and I were running around in, I'd say, DEFCON garb with 30,000 fellow hackers and trying to help the industry and the research community work together. But at the same time as doing that, I'm sitting there thinking you're looking after acquisition for the Air Force with a budget of 60 billion and actually helping drive and innovate cybersecurity across the whole of the Air Force, which is an amazing position to be in. And thank you very much for supporting all of this effort.
Very welcome.
Can I just kick off by just asking you to talk about what you see as your vision going forwards for the Air Force when it comes to cybersecurity?
It's a big question, Pete. And one, I just want to congratulate you for the Aviation Village. I thought that you did a tremendous job pulling that together under tough circumstances, and well done. I was very proud to be there the first year and proud the Air Force was there in force. I also want to thank the Atlantic Council. This is an important topic. So we need to talk about this a lot. We're talking about aviation. We need to talk about space too, because we have a chance to try to grow a future domestic industry base and the supply chain that supports it, that builds things more securely so that the next generation of tech doesn't have vulnerabilities that leave us exposed. And I guess the vision for the Air Force is simply we've got to change our model of the way we do acquisition and procurement. I mean, the Cold War system is not going to work. We're not isolated from our adversaries the way we were against the Soviet Union. We're going to share a global tech ecosystem, a global supply chain, and there's no way to extricate ourselves from it cleanly without having detriment. And then also, we're going to face at least some near-term disadvantages to countries like China that are able to take companies inside their borders and just anoint them as the champions of areas of tech. Of course, we don't do that. We let markets play out. But if you look at the way we do business in the Air Force, we work with an increasingly shrinking list of companies we call the defense industrial base. And they're great, and I love working with them, but that's simply not going to work because today, U.S. military research and development is only 20% of this nation's whole. So if we're only working with a subset of our companies with 20% of the money that's spent on R&D, we're just shortchanging the future Air Force to have the benefits that coast-to-coast tech can provide. So the vision for me is to find a new model that encourages people to work with us, not to make them defense companies, but to make them dual-use companies capable of meeting both military needs and also domestic needs. And so we know that model is going to require us to get outside of our fence lines and to tell industry what we need for military mission. And for programs like our space launch program, we're telling rocket providers that want to sell to a lot of commercial companies that want to put the internet and other industries in space what it takes to put a military satellite in space. We give them that requirement because we're a pretty stable launch provider. So working with us provides stability that lets you compete for those new markets. There's a case for being dual use. You can imagine that cybersecurity falls in that model, right? We don't want to be working with only defense unique tech for it to be cyber secure. We would like to work with companies that can meet military needs for certain missions that we can buy from as a purchaser amongst many, get the benefits of economy of scale. But if we're going to compete long-term against countries like China, we need to make our supply chain for any mission area, for any tech area, especially aviation, more and more secure so it's not a vulnerability that we have in future. And if you're thinking long-term competition, I mean, a conflict's not very likely. And so if that's true, then building the future Air Force and making it the best possible is insufficient to win. We can do that and not build an industry base that can win. So it's important in this century where the military is intermingled with domestic development and domestic tech that we use the building of the future Air Force to build a better innovation base. And my hope is that by getting outside of the Pentagon, getting into places like DEFCON, that we inspire a next generation of innovators to think, I can work with the U.S. Air Force, and that's going to help me become commercially successful and hopefully make the world a better place.
So really from that, what I'm hearing is it's the innovation and it's the partnerships. Mm-hmm. But that's really coming from your previous role when you were looking at you were responsible for the Strategic Capabilities Office, where that task was, right, how do we innovate? How do we disrupt? How do we really accelerate a lot of this work that we're doing? And what I'm hearing is that you're taking a lot of that logic and thinking into the whole acquisition process, mm-hmm. which isn't going to be easy when we look at some of the systems out there that might take 10, 15 years to develop and then get fielded. So how do we balance that absolute need and desire for innovation and having cutting edge when some of those programs are hugely long tail at the back end?
So Pete, I guess I often don't think about the last job as much as I need to, but I think there is some continuation. You know, that job was really meant to go out and look for ideas that could disrupt adversaries. So it's kind of a subset of what you need to do to win. Then you get asked to do Air Force acquisition and procurement, which was a great honor to be asked and to have that trust put in you. But you really got to disrupt the whole system. You know, yes, we want to build systems that disrupt adversaries, that impose costs, that win wars, right? That's our job. That's what you pay us to do. But that's not enough, right? We also need to disrupt the process with which we build things. If it takes 10 to 15 years to build the next generation of systems, we're already lost, right? We're already irrelevant because our time to market's irrelevant. So we have to change the way that we buy things. There are a lot of technologies that we're super excited about, like modern agile DevSecOps software development is so much faster than what the Pentagon was doing when I came into this job. Digital engineering, digital twinning, digital thread has the chance to allow us to push learning into the digital world that we actually experience in the real world, the hard way on the production line. All these are things that we see changing industries like the automotive. And you think about it, a car is pretty high tech today. It's not that dissimilar from an aircraft, from a fighter. And so we're doing our best to pull those technologies in so that the way that we build the spear is better, not just the spear itself.
And that conversation you're having with manufacturers and the supply chain, is that conversation landing? Is that conversation something that they're really taking up with you and seeing what this journey and this whole process change is going to look like?
To a degree. I mean, this is such a big plane, I was about to say ship, such a big plane to turn around that it's literally going to be a 0.9 G turn, just very slow, because the reality is when you come into a job like this and you really want to change things and make the system competitive against China, you can't take the legacy programs that are on contract and just go to the industry partner and say we're going to completely change things. Right? You're already locked down. So you change things new program by new program. For the new programs that get the benefit of this, they're fundamentally different. And so I'm very proud of all the people who are managing software for us. There are programs that have really cool names from sci-fi inspired locations like Kessel Run and Kobayashi Maru and Level Up, and it's changing the culture, right? Software is cool, digital is cool in the Air Force, and that's important because we undervalue marketing and branding. That goes directly to culture, and culture is what actually does innovation for you. It's what's going to win the war for innovation, not a government process. So I'm super happy with that. I'm happy that digital engineering is coming in. That'll help us go a little faster and be more agile with the hardware side, be able to integrate it with software. And the programs that are doing that, like Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, the Minuteman III replacement, the next generation fighter, 6th Gen fighter, is using full digital development. They're fundamentally different than the legacy programs. So if we can keep this culture that values digital, all things digital, software development, design, assembly, everything, then I think we'll eventually change the Air Force new program to new program. And excellence will inspire more excellence. The thing that you mentioned earlier, security can't be an afterthought. And that's a mistake I almost made, Pete. Trying to go fast and get results, right? How do you make software cool? Let's go do cool things. Let's go fast to get those results. What about security? Well, let's just accept the 80% solution. We'll fix it after the fact. You really can't do that. You've got to put security into your process, into your development platform itself. And if you do, going securely means you can even go faster than you could on your own. So, mistake I almost made, super thankful to the software experts in the Air Force that got me smart on that fast enough to make sure we're on the right side of security so that software is a shield without cracks in it.
Okay, so with the new programs and all the effort that's going into really doing that cyber resilience of the new programs, there's still all of the legacy systems which are out there. And I know that you've been doing a lot of work with the team to look at the cybersecurity of all of those legacy systems. How do we approach and improve that sort of resilience of those legacy systems, some of which have been in service for many years, and actually putting an increased sort of ring of resilience around them is a real challenge?
It's something I worry about all the time, is that we don't know the code that's actually running in our systems. We know the code we asked the vendors to write for us, right? That we have a lot of cybersecurity procedures to check, pen testing, fuzz testing. But what about the embedded code that's in the supply chain? That's what's different. The government process to try to do supply chain management is really about trying to keep a counterfeit part from being put on an airplane, something that needs to be made out of Inconel, actually made out of titanium, and having that swap. We're good at that. But what about embedded code? There's code on almost everything. Chips, boards, right? A small kernel that you can boot up as a diagnostic tool, and we don't know it. So we're going to have to fundamentally shift the way we approach embedded code if we actually want to be secure. And I can imagine doing it. I can imagine having the same reporting scheme where people can say, hey, I know something is wrong, or an ethical hacker that uses a backdoor to get in, to report that. I could see pulling those in larger databases in the government that we turn into contract restrictions. You can't do these things. You need to disable ports and don't have any write functions on these certain systems. And we could start making the supply chain more secure. But the government needs to wake up and realize software is in everything, and that the provenance that we have of our systems has to start with that root individual component. And so we've got real heroes work to do. I think DEFCON could be a great platform to find those things, but Pete, we can't find them after we built the system. My hope is that we can bring the ethical hacker community into our design process, that we can do bug bounties when we're designing things, when we're building prototypes, and that people can make a living just hacking Air Force systems, finding issues before we go to production, and our systems are better because of it.
Yeah, I do seem to remember the when we sort of met at DEFCON, it was fantastic because you pitched up, and it was one of those things that, okay, we really want to change the way we're thinking about this. So for those that weren't there, it was a really good opportunity to actually build bridges across lots of different parts of the community, whether that was turning up with a simulator to help show hackers and the research community what it's like to fly an aircraft. But also as well, you turned up with some hardware that you allowed the hacker and the research community to actually have a go at. Do you want to just talk everybody through that and from your perspective, how it went and the success of that?
Sure. No, I think it was really successful. I guess the hackers were successful, and I guess we're successful too because we found the issues. But yeah, we brought something because we wanted to, one, show that we really are willing to do things differently. We're willing to approach cybersecurity differently, and that means we're going to need to be more open and work with a broader community of experts that know of issues that could be in our systems that we don't. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two, message across the Air Force. We need to do business differently. If commercial tech companies get out and do bug bounties and use open design schemas to be more secure, then we can do that too. Can't keep doing because I developed it behind a fence line in a secure facility, it must be secure on the battlefield. That's no longer true. And three, we wanted to show that we've got to think about the whole ecosystem of a program. So the system that we brought is one you've never heard of. It's a data transfer system for the F-15 fighter. So you can imagine when we're thinking cybersecurity for the F-15, we're really thinking about cybersecurity once that jet is flying, right? And we have pretty good processes for that. But you can imagine we probably don't start thinking about, well, at some point an airman has to take the data system and transfer data to the jet. Well, that has access to the jet. What if you get access to that? So we wanted to see if the ethical hacker community could hack the soft underbelly that we don't think about. And they were able to do it. And so they gave me great feedback. And the best part of that event was just having a group of hackers stick around and walk me through what they would do differently. And what they told me was the ways we got in were not the things you told industry to design. They were the things industry doesn't know is in their supply chain. It's the ports that weren't cut off, the drive functions that weren't cut off. These are the things you need to tell industry don't do. Well, we don't know they're there. Our defense companies are assemblers from the supply chain. They don't require their suppliers to tell them what code, what software functionality is running on components because we don't tell industry to do that. So we've got to start doing that. And my favorite quote from DEFCON was a hacker who looked at me and said, it looks like you're only getting the bare minimum of what you're asking industry to do. And I've got that on video. I've said, you've just summarized our defense acquisition system. Yes, we need industry to do better. We shouldn't have to tell them to get that level of cyber hygiene, but it doesn't excuse us from leading on the government side. So I have a team right now working, well, not night and day, but they're working really hard to pull together that process so that we start putting cyber hygiene into our contracting system. You have to deliver it to us uncompromised.
And that's something that a lot of the commercial sector is also looking at, is actually getting that cyber hygiene into the design phase and actually the operating phase. But I'm going to ask a really hard question, which is, well, how much is enough? I mean, you've got a completely different threat model potentially to a lot of the to the commercial sector. So how do you give direction about this is the bar that I'm looking for?
Mm-hmm. So you mean, I think ultimately things that we ask for have to be measurable. So there's no way to put something on contract that's going to hold if you can in the government check something that's been delivered. So what I think we can do, Pete, is have rules that are cyber hygiene rules in our contracts that tell industry you need to do things like disable write functions and ports and say thou shalt. Thou, that's a deliverable, they'll do that. We could require them, and we should require them to tell us all of the embedded code on their system as far as they're able. There'll be a certain level of the supplier that may be difficult, but we should require that. These are things that industry has to respond to. And right now, the cybersecurity mechanisms that we engage with industry on really look like 1990s dial-up internet style protections. They have not progressed to this decade. And so the reason that I came back from DEFCON thinking we've got to change this is that every day we don't, we're allowing more of a supply chain we don't understand into the Air Force, and we have to stop.
So, I mean, we'll continue the DEFCON sort of conversation, but before we do, I want to try and lift us out of the technology. Mm-hmm. So the way that I think about this challenge is that this is a long-term strategic challenge. And if we just focus on the technology, that's going to be like running whilst looking at our feet. Mm-hmm. So if we really want to have good long-term strategic change, we've got to be thinking about policy, strategy, leadership, and setting our eyes on the horizon, what we want to try and achieve. From your perspective, leading from the Air Force side, how do you think you can help shape that strategic thinking across the rest of industry about how you're approaching this? Because this is great from an Air Force perspective, but how can we use some of that logic and that approach across all of the other sector?
Sure. Topic I'm passionate about, right, is not just being an Air Force working defense, right? We have an imperative to be part of the equation that keeps innovation in this country dominant. Like, innovation is a battlefield almost. Maybe it is, maybe that's true. So how do we engage? If we go off and we build the best tech to make fighters and bombers and whatever other kinds of airplanes we dream up in future more secure, then we've played an underwhelming role. So I think the role that we can play as the Air Force are several. I mean, one, we have a relationship with most of the major companies that build large aircraft. And we have a long-term relationship, a trusted relationship. And so we could leverage that because if we certify something for one of our airplanes, if it's good enough for us, then it ought to be good enough for civilian use. And although we might not want to have the latest and greatest, like absolute best protection mechanism that's on our cutting edge airplane, whatever it is, we may not want to make that available in industry immediately, especially if it's needed to protect us. But what about the generation before? I think there's a role that we can play by using our certification process as a way to stimulate faster adoption in commercial industry. The thing we're going to have to do that is get our tech out of the Air Force laboratory, out of our development system, out into the commercial hands. And you probably know I brought a prop. This is something we just flew on a drone, and it's an embedded system protection platform for the U.S. Air Force. It basically has a separation kernel and security services that are native in the platform. And it's meant so that people who are experts in drone don't have to be cybersecurity experts to make their drones difficult to hack. So we put this on a drone. We had one drone with it and one drone without. You could imagine the one without, we were giving it like specious sensor prompts and commands and making the drone do all sorts of things that we saw at DEFCON, being able to fool it into thinking that it was getting inputs that weren't comporting with reality. But the drone that has the security that has the hypervisor with the policy manager on it, that policy manager is able to look at the commands that are running through the aircraft and saying, this one looks normal, that one doesn't. It's able to throw it out. So this is awesome for our drones that we're going to be flying on the battlefield, but why haven't we given this to industry? It's government owned. So one of the things that I've told our research lab is let's get this transitioned to the car industry or to the aviation, because it's a technology that we designed for drones that we expect we might lose. It's really good tech, but it's not tech that we would be worried to have in anyone's hands. So this is probably more valuable to the nation if it's spread across the whole industry base as opposed to just having it in military aircraft. That's an unusual thought for us, right? The idea that we could use Air Force R&D to stimulate a better commercial supply chain and industry base is a new idea. There's no process that tells us to do that. There's no command that tells us to do that, but we need to. And my hope, even though I've come back into the tech, that if we're doing that, constantly transitioning things that we trust, because in the end we certify our systems for war, I hope that that can be the coattails that commercial adoption can ride. And the other thing I hope, Pete, I think this is going to be a big thing for us. We can't, unless someone can give me a reason it's a good idea, I think making security a competitive delineator would be a bad idea. We can't make security trade secret, because similar to the vulnerability sharing across the industry, if there's a new security best practice, that's something that needs to be shared. It needs to be driven by the government so that we don't have an industry base that separates in terms of security practice. So every once in a while in the defense circle, I hear cost, schedule, performance, and security, and I'm a little wary of the latter. Once security has IP stamped on it, I don't know if we get to come back from that easily.
I mean, firstly, I'll just go back to what you've just shown there, is that actually, I think I'll speak for the whole of the research community and the sector, which is, it's amazing that you're sitting here going, we've got some fantastic hardware that makes a huge difference to cybersecurity of platforms, and we're looking to offer it out to help improve everybody's security.
Well, I mean, I may be in that self-driving vehicle, and I want this in it, right? I may be in that airplane. I want this in it. So if there's anyone that's building self-driving vehicles or vehicles of any kind, and you're interested, this is called Ares. It's built by our research lab, and we're interested to talk to you.
And we did speak briefly about getting it into DEFCON as well to play
Sure.
with, and that's for another conversation. So, I mean, this is a huge step change, and I think it's a really welcome step change. And you touched then at the end about making sure that security doesn't become a commercial delineator. Mm-hmm. And I think we've also seen that across the safety world as well, that we wouldn't see safety as a commercial driver. And actually making sure that we've got that parity across safety and security is going to be critical for the industry going forwards. Going back to what you see as the ecosystem that you're trying to protect, and the rest of the sector is trying to protect. We had an amazing conversation at DEFCON last year where we sort of sidled off to the corner and said, this is fantastic, but this is the aviation village. Mm-hmm. The sector is increasingly reliant on space. Mm-hmm. And as we discussed at the time, we pretty much described cybersecurity of space assets being around 1980, so about 10 years behind. So I sort of fairly cheekily asked whether we could start playing with satellites, and you've dug in hugely. Do you want to just briefly talk about how you're approaching the space perspective and maybe touch on some of the things we might be doing next year?
Sure. No, it was a great idea. So after the Aviation Village was so successful, and I remember Jeff Moss coming by and saying, wow, this looks like you've been running for 3 or 4 years, right? And it's only the first year. That the idea of bringing in space makes a lot of sense. And so I'm glad that you're willing to take the child you've just birthed and then kind of rebrand it again as the Aerospace Village. I think that'll be hugely successful. But we're a service that does a lot of our work in space, and in this town, space is a warfighting domain is a common phrase, because why fight the fighter that's got the stealth and the radar and the weapons if you can disable the satellites that enable it and that enable really everything else in the military. So the asymmetric advantage that an adversary would try to have over us by holding space at risk, we're now fighting against, trying to build our own advantage, make space resilient, defendable, and then also be able to threaten if we need to. And so we're at the beginning of writing a new chapter in the department, which is how do you win wars that extend into space. So we need to get the community more aware of security challenges in space. I would imagine that if you did your same survey that you were showing earlier about you can't hack an aircraft, I imagine you might get something similar if you went through satellites. Well, they're in space, so they must be safe, right? I mean, you can't go grab them, not easily. But if you work in the satellite business, you touch them all the time. They're ground stations that move things up and down. So of course they're going to be vulnerable to cyber attacks if you don't design them correctly. What about the supply chain that goes into them, right? Space is going to be a booming industry, right? There's variance in what the final number is, but most of the big accounting firms, investment firms, say it's at least going to be $1 trillion of the economy by 2040, maybe as high as 3. So there's going to be a lot of innovation and technology. And you can imagine if you're trying to get your company up to that first product market fit, you're probably not thinking, and I need to design my system to be hardened against a peer nation like China. Right? That's going to be an afterthought. So we need to get awareness in the community that if we can do better cyber security, cyber hygiene up front before the industry booms, the future space renaissance will be more secure and it'll be a better prop for our national security. So what we're going to do is make one of our satellites available to a team of ethical cleared hackers, just to be able to expose the challenges of trying to hack something in orbit. Because aside from the fact that it's a unique piece of hardware with unique ground stations, it's whizzing around the Earth wicked fast. You only have access to it certain times. And we want to see if a team can do it. So I know we're going to call it something kind of like the Space Security Challenge, but we just keep calling it Hack-A-Sat inside the Air Force, so that's probably what our t-shirts will say. But the reason is we want the community to learn, that cybersecurity in space is important. We want future space companies to think that. We also want to see if the way we're approaching cybersecurity is flawed. So maybe we'll have a team that brings in a new trick and we'll say, wait a second, we didn't think of that. So we are not being more secure sitting behind our high walls. Right? When I was at DEFCON, it's my first time we've really had a large government contingent there. There are 46,000 hackers that have amazing technical capability. And the US military isn't there looking for partnerships, being part of a community that knows a lot more about software and vulnerabilities than we do. How myopic and short-sighted?
So I have to say it was an amazing conversation. When sort of you fairly cheekily ask, "Excuse me, can we have a satellite, please?" and the answer is, "Yeah, we can probably do that." So that really shows some of the depth from a technical perspective, some of the vision from a strategic perspective, some of the amazing initiatives on the technology. But going right down to the foundation of the workforce taking this forwards. So across all of the other sectors, now really starting to understand that cybersecurity workforce, both now and for the years going ahead, is going to be critical to success. From both your perspective on the Air Force and to help get the wider sector start thinking about that, what do you see as the key ways that we're going to be able to generate that workforce and inspire them to come into the sector to help defend all of this critical infrastructure?
I hope that we'll have an advantage in aviation and aerospace if we go broader because airplanes and satellites are cool. I mean, that's just a big help when you're doing acquisition for the Air Force. You don't have to twist people's arms to get them to go build cool airplanes and satellites. And of course, we have cyber as part of our mission as well. So what a great trifecta. So I think just the industry we're in will inspire people because it's a domain where we push boundaries. I also think that the idea of cybersecurity coming into a new industry will inspire people who want to be at the ground floor of something. I think in order to bring people in, we're going to have some tangible wins really early on that really benefit the community. People have got to see a global impact of this if we want to get top talent. And what I hope to do, for my part as the Air Force, is to show that this is a community endeavor. I want the Air Force to be part of the aviation and aerospace community. I want to play the unique role that we can play as a government organization, but be open to learn and flex to the needs of the broader industry base, because our future depends on building a stronger industry base than the one that entered this century. The thing that keeps me awake frequently is when the Air Force was in its early days, back in the, say, 50s, there were 13 companies that could build tactical aircraft for us, like fighter-type aircraft. And now we're down to 2. Maybe 3. There might be one of the companies not building one for us that could come back in. We're down to 2. And so that's what should wake us up, is that we are shrinking the industry base that we need for future competitiveness. And the model we used in the last century does not work. And so hopefully by opening ourselves up, working in commercial tech, we've got huge initiatives right now working with commercial startups and venture capitalists, and we're really blazing trail quickly. But it's not just about working in cool tech, it's about trying to build an industry base, a model in this century where a company says, you know what, I've got my product line, and my product line serves both military and commercial use. And because I've got that military product line, it actually helps me commercially. That's common sense. If you can work in 2 markets, you ought to get the benefit as opposed to only working in one. What a shame that people think working with the government is a detriment, and that's true, right? We have been slow. We have not been able to work at the pace that people need. So this is a dead serious business. If innovation is the battlefield on which we have to win in order to build an Air Force that could win on the real battlefield, we've got to win the first to have a chance to win the second. And the first is an afterthought in the Pentagon. We tend to sit in our programs and their uses on the battlefield and not ask if the building of them, similar to not doing crop rotation, if the building of them will just erode all of the nutrients in the soil that is our industry base, such that we can't grow things in future.
Thanks. Great answer. I'm very conscious that we've got some amazing people in the audience, so I will open up for questions now to Dr. Roper. And we have got mics. So are there any initial questions for Dr. Roper? Yeah. In fact, we'll just get a mic over to you now.
So this has actually been a really interesting conversation, and I'm pleased by the number of things that you said that I've solidly agreed with. So that's the good news.
That's a good start.
Yes, it's always a good start. But one of the things I was kind of curious about was you phrased that really interesting when you were talking about your hack of SAT. Mm-hmm. Is it your intention to restrict the access to which teams can participate by individual or organization?
We are. That's the discussion around how we're going to do that is evolving at the moment, and we'll have more news about that as we go forwards. But it's looking to be as open as possible.
We're going to try. I mean, the one thing that we do know is that we're going to have a process to down select prior to teams that have the technical talent to do it. This is going to be hard to do. And so we do have to have a schema to make sure that bad actors are not getting access to a military satellite. That would not play well in this town. So we have to have a screening process. We have to have a way for people to apply. Here's my technical approach. We're working that right now with our friends and colleagues in the Defense Digital Service. These are the hackers inside the Pentagon. Brett Goldstein and his group, awesome people, great partners. And then we think we're probably going to have to down select to a group and then mail them a flat sat. That's what we call kind of a ground-based functional representation of the satellite, so that they can get some practice before doing it live at DEFCON. Because again, with this thing orbiting around the Earth, once every 90 minutes, you got to have your game plan down. So we're working that, and we realize if we don't get the learning curve part of it right, we'll have teams that have wicked talent show up. Good ethical hackers with talent who can help us, but we won't have given them the practice runs, and the learning they'll be doing on site won't help them because they won't have enough time, and it won't help us. So we've got a lot of thinking to do, and we hope to have details ironed out really before the end of the year. We're meeting this Friday with Pete and our team to discuss, so hopefully we'll crack the code, unintended.
And if I could just have a fast follow-on, something you may want to consider with regards to the supply chain aspect, same kind of premise. If you consider a group that's perhaps a little bit wider than what you're talking about, but pre-evaluated, something we've been discussing with some of your sister organizations is a bug bounty program of select CDCs, for lack of a better term.
That's where we really want to be in the Air Force next year, is that if you're running a program, you typically build something that's either a hardware in the loop or a software in the loop simulator. You do that before you go into production. And it really is, it's not form factor like the thing you're going to produce, but it's all the hardware and software that you need. You can check it out. That's the opportunity. That's where you want to run your bug bounty. And so what I'm working on with programs that are in their design is putting bug bounty in a prize schema so that if you find a vulnerability, you get paid and you know how much. And I hope that the best talent in the world will just think, well, I can basically stay employed just hacking Air Force systems because they're fair with the rewards that they give, and that the top talent will actually help us make systems more secure, which saves us money. So it's win-win if we get this right. The issue is going to be us. It's just getting over I designed it and a hacking team got in however number of minutes. You got to get over that. Right? The idea is to iterate to excellent, not deliver excellence. No one delivers in one fell swoop. The lean, agile methodologies that have proved themselves far superior than final product delivery are the way we have to go. And there's nothing new here, right? This lesson was learned by Toyota back in the 50s, that you need to work quality all along your process. Well, digital tools now allow you to bring different things along, aside from quality, like security. It can now be part of your process all along the way. And we aspire to go even further to bring test and things of that nature into our development process and platform, such that it's happening all the time in the backdrop. And that's common now in many commercial industries. So where's the Air Force? The question we're asking.
Thank you very much. So next question, if you'd just like to identify yourself and then go with the question, please.
Yeah, hi, Jacob Markish at Thales North America. Well, you talked about the potential value of encouraging dual-use companies, both in general and with cyber in particular, to leverage commercial technology, commercial R&D efforts into government and vice versa. And with respect to that, I was curious and a bit surprised with your prop. It seems like a really valuable piece of hardware. But also at the same time, there's clearly many companies working today on doing that kind of solution for autonomous vehicles, right, for commercial applications, monitoring for network anomalies or otherwise. So just with respect to that example, but maybe more generally, how do you think about where are the areas in overlap between commercial and defense where you see the most value of engaging commercially exposed or enterprise exposed cyber-focused businesses to help them add value to government?
Sure. No, I mean, if we're going to actually succeed in competing against nations like China long term, we can't probably poorly replicate in the government what's going to happen naturally and organically in industry. So right now, the Pentagon's not broadly attuned to directions that commercial tech are going. That means we have to understand the business cases, the value propositions of commercial counterparts, or we'll make the wrong deals inside the Air Force. So learning curve has to be scaled quickly. In the case of things like the processor, there may be better things in industry. Part of this engagement is maybe there's something better I can use from them, or maybe this is better than what's being done because it's military grade in many respects. So we've got to find the balance of where we're value add. There are a lot of technologies right now that we see coming to us from software development initiatives, like Kubernetes has moved so quickly, and we want to ride that train because the containerization solves one of our major challenges in the Air Force, is that I can run code on my laptop and my development platform the exact same way that it runs on the jet. I just saved so many certification steps just by using containerization. So that's one that we're going to ride that wave. But a lot of times the hardware protections that we develop, I think, might be a generation ahead of where commercial industry is. And the question we should ask is, are they things that we need to continue to protect inside government channels only, or can we transition them out? I think macro, the relationship and partnership, will probably have us leaning a little more on hardware research and development, because right now of the R&D in this nation, right, about 80% of it is digital. Right? So hardware is becoming increasingly less frequent because the return on investment horizon is longer. Well, we have that longer return on investment horizon. And so a lot of the interesting partnerships we're creating with commercial industry are where we have a hardware investment that's of interest to them. So I can't give you the answer right now because we've started the journey, but the thing that I think is going to be the challenge for the Pentagon is that the people that will need to do these jobs like mine in future, will really need to understand the entire landscape of technology, which means that they could be out doing it. So why would they want to come do a government job with all the restrictions? So my job is to hopefully make this one of the coolest jobs that you can do in the Pentagon, because you get to build amazing airplanes, satellites, and cyber. I mean, where else can you do that? So hopefully people that feel patriotic and able to contribute with innovative, technology-driven ideas will say, I don't want to go work in the government, but I might go do that Air Force job.
Just expanding on that slightly, so the hardware and being able to offer out some of that sort of groundbreaking hardware, to me is really pointing at that there is still no one solution. This is going to be, there are lots of different solutions, and this is about evolving as quickly as possible, and then consistently finding that next thing. That there is no planting a flag, that's the thing that's going to secure us. We need to keep going forwards. But that's from a hardware perspective. What about for information sharing on things like vulnerabilities and platforms? So you're doing a lot of work to look into those vulnerabilities. How do you really focus on being able to share that knowledge out to the wider sector?
Yeah, so right now, great question. So right now we have a team of hackers in the Air Force. They're called CROWs, Cyber Resiliency Officer for Weapon Systems. But anyway, you always make the acronym into a word that's cool. So CROWs, and they have something to do with cyber resiliency. We don't have enough of them. So we're not going to be able to probe our systems. We might use our own NSA type people for really sensitive systems, or the Air Force has a lot of classified capabilities, so we're not going to be able to do those in a cleared way. But where we can, we need to get external talent. The key is going to be when we find a vulnerability on one system, having a one-stop shop place to publish it so that everyone else who engages afterwards has that on the no-no list. And I've said contracts many times. You're probably thinking that sounds pretty boring. That's the mechanism that things actually happen. If you put it on contract, you usually get it. But if you don't, you almost never will. It goes back to that hacker's comment. It looks like you're getting the bare minimum. So we've got to raise what that bare minimum is in the contract itself. That ought to be pretty easy. You do a bug bounty, you find a bunch of vulnerabilities, you put them into a database, you hit enter, and now that vulnerability is known to everyone else who's going to let a contract. These things can't be in my system. So I don't think this is hard. We just need to care about it.
That almost seems like a complete link up, because ensuring that cybersecurity and lifecycle management was embedded within contracts was one of the key findings out of the report.
Oh, great.
So
I'm hoping to read. I was reading through it this morning, so I'm hoping to finish it.
I owe you a beer for that
promise
one.
you I did not know.
No, that's right. I'll still give you a beer. Right, so a question at the back. Thank you. Please identify yourself and kick off the question.
Yeah, just to piggyback off the earlier question, I understand this seems to still be an early process. The technology that you have, can the jet be adapted, the commercial airliners be adapted, or is there a whole new design and implementation process that has to come with that, and a new wave of purchasing for commercial airlines?
Do you mean like technologies like this thing to adapt?
Yeah.
No, that's a great question. No, we've designed it so that so let me tell you like how we use it and how the analog might be for commercial industry. We've got people who are cyber experts in the Air Force. We have people who are drone experts, and it's pretty unusual to have people that are both. So the idea was to design a system where a drone program in the Air Force could go out and work with their drone provider, bring some of these, which hopefully we would miniaturize, and just be able to drop them into the system so you rehost the critical payloads that are on that system. This is meant to accept them easily. It encapsulates them in isolated containers, hosted on virtual machines that are run by hypervisor kernel, microkernel. The idea is to make the cybersecurity easy for the drone company, right? To not have to basically redesign around this. And there's no reason that you couldn't extrapolate that to vehicles or commercial aircraft. It's just us having the thought that technology we developed to go on military drones that could be lost, and therefore we can't make this so exquisite that we wouldn't be okay losing it, that the most valuable contribution we could make would be getting this into commercial industry, vice making our drone more secure. That's an odd thought, and that needs to become the normal thought for us. We're developing for the military, what can it do to our commercial industry base? How can we make it better? So I'm very passionate about this because I don't see this thinking in the Pentagon. I see us very focused on lethality. We should make dominant systems, but that's not enough anymore. That's 20th century think. We got to get past it.
And for those that are not sort of still cluing into that, I mean, what Dr. Roper here is saying is a huge step change. It's a huge step change in so many different ways, and actually it's fantastic that you're going down that route.
You know, one thing that is kind of like blowing my minds in the Air Force is we're starting a program around flying cars, which, back, whatever they end up being called, but I call them flying cars. So these things that are meant to finally do what the Jetsons have promised us forever, and we're finally going to get there. So right now, I don't have a requirement for one in the Air Force, and typically, your typical government procurer says if you don't have a requirement, then you don't work in it. But there's a market that's evolving that really needs to get certified to fly, to build up the safety credentials, so that we can lead the charge for this new industry base. And it doesn't occur to us in the Air Force that, wait a second, we certify our own systems, and we can do so pretty quickly. And we have our own airspace and our own ranges. We can fly things easily. Why aren't we influencing the development of this market in a way that will help the Air Force do missions, but that actually speeds up the development of the market itself? So we're going to be reaching out next year and doing a DARPA-like challenge on one of our military installations, haven't picked it yet, so that companies that can do mission for us now can get on a path to be certified by us, and we'll start flying and doing mission. And I imagine that'll speed up the FAA certification significantly when the Air Force says it's safe for us. That's an odd thought, right? We should be out influencing the direction of a commercial market that's mainly going to be commercial in a way that helps the military, but also helps accelerate that market. That's how you'll win the competition. I fear this is going to be a tough torch to hand over, because you can never stop thinking, you can never stop looking, you can never stop researching. Innovation's everywhere. And so if innovation's everywhere, then your battlefield is everywhere. Your opportunities are everywhere, but your risks are everywhere. And so you can never be comfortable. And unfortunately, a lot of times I see the Pentagon wants to create a comfortable solution. And that's not going to happen in the near future.
But that adversarial, that almost adversarial, challenging mindset that you're talking about of constantly looking for where the next failure is coming, looking for how to make things more resilient, not accepting the assurance of that system is safe or that system is secure. I mean, that's something that, from listening to you, that there's a huge amount of learning that could take place across the rest of the industry in having that more of that assumption from that challenging and looking at it from an adversary's perspective. I mean, I've never heard a hacker or a researcher say that something wasn't possible.
Yeah.
There's always a I'm not sure, but I'm still going to give it a go. And it really sounds like changing that mindset is going to be one of the key things going forwards.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think the urgency that companies face, when you've got to grow quickly or you're going to collapse and go out of business, we haven't had that urgency without a peer competitor. I wasn't working in the Pentagon in the Cold War, but I'm going to guess it felt pretty urgent, right? Given you had an adversary that could match you in almost every function. And of course, we won, very different time, and that playbook won't work again, but we won by continually disrupting and innovating and forcing them to spend out. We've had a good run where we haven't had a peer. We haven't felt like anything we've sent, like anything the Air Force would send into the battlefield would not return home. And we've been able to watch conflict in high definition video. So that's not going to happen anymore, right? We face a peer that can challenge us in every way, in every domain, and build the same kinds of things that we can. So that means that the solution is not going to be a system that we build, and when we field it, we say, great, finally, we're back to winning. It's going to be continually disrupting, getting to market faster, finding opportunity faster. And until dynamics change, we've got to be able to keep that up over the long run. So urgency is the most important thing, which is why, for me, running the Air Force's tech company, the most important thing is a culture that feels urgent. Not the kind of urgency that, I don't want it to be unhealthy. It's just that time matters. We've got to move. But in any kind of innovative culture, time matters, right? No one innovating thinks, I'll just take the day off. Time matters. So we can create that kind of tech startup feel in the Air Force because the adversary we face demands it.
Thank you very much. I mean, the final question, just please say your name and crack on with the question.
Hey, I'm Joe Zaffarini. Actually, I sit at the intersection, having run a cyber company. I'm also a pilot, so very interested in this.
Cool.
Yeah, and it is cool.
You want to come work in the Air Force?
I'd love to. But one of the things that kind of struck me is at the NSA, they have sort of a deconfliction deconflicting procedure when a vulnerability is found, where they have to weigh the benefits of either leveraging that vulnerability for tradecraft or, of course, disclosing it for the safety, for the broader safety. And that's something that, as a pilot, to kind of bring it to that realm, sometimes I'll be flying and I'll get NOTAMs for GPS testing. Of course, GPS system is run by the Department of Defense. And sorry, it looks like you know where I'm going with this.
No, keep going.
Well, one of the things that I think is important as the aviation sector and the national airspace becomes a lot more technically advanced and based on the GPS system run by the Department of Defense, how do you kind of take that same NSA system of deconfliction and look at national security, for example, where you may want to turn off the GPS system for national security reasons versus ultimately the safety of the populace? And I use it as one example, but as everything becomes more technical, obviously you have a lot more control.
So saving the easiest question for the end, where we start getting to the equities process. Epic.
Well, I'll have to, what the right end state is, I'll have to think about, but I'll give you my initial reaction to your question. I mean, we're a service that has to deal with exactly what you're talking about all the time. So vulnerability, opportunity, especially with the cyber mission. And so we do that calculus for our own systems. I think where vulnerabilities convey to commercial systems, I think it'll usually be pretty easy to determine the way to go, because we will be much better and more secure competing long term with a secure civilian industry-based, commercial industry-based, secure commercial systems, and the Internet of Things that we feel like is difficult to challenge. So I think we'll have a different divide between military vulnerabilities that we find on military unique platforms versus commercial. But one role I think that we can play is that as a trusted agent for many of the companies that will be hopefully working in both worlds, that disclosing them to us will be a place that they could go, or maybe working with civilian organizations like ICAO, maybe we could help start working on the fixes to vulnerabilities that are found. So I don't know the right answer, but I know that we need to be part of the community and bring the research and development dollars that we have, the technical experts that we have, and make sure that our vector is not just trying to make a more secure Air Force, but to really make a more secure industry base. You know, Internet of Things and 5G, do you think cyber resilience for that will be a big factor in who wins the competition? You betcha. It's why the Air Force has installed 5G at 3 bases, and we're inviting companies in to experimentation and testing. And the question we're asking ourselves is, what's the role that we play? Right? We're not going to develop the fundamental technology, but maybe we can put our investments towards making the initial offering in this country more secure than it would be otherwise. We need that thinking everywhere and all the time.
Thanks so much. I mean, we could continue this conversation for a long time, and unfortunately, we're coming to an end of our time. I just want to give a huge thanks, because you've not only really exposed some fantastic initiatives that you're doing, it's also the evidence of what you're offering out to community and industry, and really helping shape that vision going forward. So massive thanks, both personally and also on behalf of the community. It's great to have you here, and so much thanks for being engaged in this.
Thanks, Pete, and just thanks for what you're doing, just pushing this initiative here at the council, pushing it at DEFCON, and the Air Force will be there in our sci-fi T-shirts this summer. We'll have a satellite to hack, maybe a system like this, maybe an airplane, but we don't want to come in as the bull of the china shop. We want to come in humbly as a member of the community with some things to give, but probably a whole lot more to learn. Appreciate your leadership, partnership, and friendship.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I think that was probably, again, one of the most fascinating discussions that you'll probably hear on aviation cybersecurity, that is quite honestly right out on the cutting edge of where we in the industry can and should be going. What we've got next is a panel with really some of those voices that are critical to how we take the industry cybersecurity challenge forwards. Everything we've learnt is that we need to increase the diversity of those voices, and we need to actually be hearing and actually working across that diversity as well. So I'll let the team get set up, and then we'll push forwards. But what we're really starting to see is actually, if you've got organisations such as the Air Force pushing out like this, we've now got organisations like Boeing doing their coordinated vulnerability disclosure. We've got even the international organisations such as ICAO with their new global strategy. We are starting to see some really amazing and key changes taking place. So if we can imagine the change that's taken over the last 2 years, the change that we should be seeing over the next 2 years should be equally exciting. And that's why I'm looking forward to welcoming up the panel that we have next. So I think the team are about there. Thank you very much. It's my incredible honour to start inviting up the panel. So in no particular order, Harley Geiger, so Director of Public Policy for Rapid7. We've got Sid Gedji, who's the Manager for InfoSec and Privacy at the FAA, and also an Aviation Cybersecurity Initiative Tri-Chair. Eric Leverowitz, who's a CISO for Thales in North America. Captain Andy Mayer from the Aviation Cybersecurity Initiative at ICAO. Olivia Stella, who's a Senior Cybersecurity Analyst at American Airlines. And then Mr. Randy Talley, who's the Senior Advisor in CISA, so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS, and also one of the Tri-Chairs of the Aviation Cybersecurity Initiative. So ladies and gentlemen, please give me a round of applause for the panel as they come up. Thank you. You get to be close to me.
You guys are very kind of me on this call.
You okay? So, everyone sort of looks slightly perched. Andy, you okay there?
These are interesting chairs. It's been a long time since I've been in a barbershop chair. The footrest is twisted from the seat.
Right, so we've had a really good scene setter for some of the challenges we're seeing across the aviation cybersecurity ecosystem. One of the key things that we highlighted 2 years ago in the first report is the opportunity that we had from ICAO as a global body and a really powerful global body in aviation is trying to ensure that global direction was able to be given from that international space. So, Andy, I'd love you to kick off and just talk about, from an ICAO perspective, as one of the global body coming down from the UN on aviation, from your perspective, the changes that have happened literally over the last 2 years, and actually where you see it going forwards.
Well, thank you, Pete. First of all, it's a great honor to be here. And on your question, I mean, it's easy to change things when there was nothing there before. So really about 3 years ago in 2016, when the General Assembly gave an assembly resolution and instructed ICAO to start thinking about a global cybersecurity aviation concept, that's where we started off. And I'm proud to see that 3 years later, now in 2019, we have come to an updated assembly resolution and an associated cybersecurity strategy. And when I say we, it's really our member states. What we have seen before at the technological level and the industry level, we're dealing with our member states. Our cybersecurity strategy is set that we have for the first time a global vision on how aviation cybersecurity should go forward. We're very proud to have a strategy in place now. I think the next challenge that we face at the global level, again, getting the consensus of all our member states to find an action plan how to put that strategy into place. Because you can appreciate that we have an action or a strategy here now, but we need to give guidance to our member states on how to put this in action. Not all our member states are at the same level, so it's really about capacity building, bringing that last element, the least developed states up to speed and have them on a common field when we talk about cybersecurity. So I'm very proud to have that in place here. It's been extremely interesting 3 years, and the community here was great in supporting us, and I'm happy to be here.
No, thanks. And that, from an international perspective, it feels like there's been lots of progress, lots of engagement, and even for an international organisation, I mean, we've discussed it as any large international organisations, it feels like moving a supertanker. But once it starts going in the right direction, then it can achieve some huge things. Sid, I'm going to come to you next from a national perspective. Are you seeing that sort of same progress from a national perspective, and do you think you've got the same sorts of challenges and opportunities?
Thanks, Pete. First of all, I'm thankful to be here, be part of this panel, and in reading through the report, let me make a few points. First of all, from a regulator perspective, nationally here in the U.S., I think the challenge is very similar to what's been identified here, which is the ecosystem is vast, it's complex, there's a lot of different players. And from the FAA standpoint, we have a whole depiction of that ecosystem. You know, I don't think we control or sort of oversee everything. We see parts of it. We certify aircraft. We are also an operating organization. We run the air traffic control system. But there's a lot of other systems that airlines own, that airports own. And so we are well aware of the fact that we have no involvement in some of the other systems out there. And so the goal really becomes to start building those partnerships and start building that trust. And the real key here is trust building. And that's what my office is doing. I'm leading a team of folks that are doing that stakeholder engagement globally, both domestically here in the US with DHS and others, but also globally with ICAO and others. So I agree with a lot of what you found, and I think we are looking at the world in a very similar fashion. I think the fact is information sharing is critical. I think we have to come together as a community well before a cyber event happens in order to share vulnerabilities and fix things. I think technology is moving really fast, but if we can build trust within the community beforehand and address the risks across the ecosystem, that'll be a huge success. But what you're trying to define here is a very complicated problem. So I applaud the Atlantic Council and you, Pete, for trying to get your hands around what's a very difficult and a complex ecosystem. Some of the other things like building bridges, absolutely. I think that's what we want to do at FAA, is build those bridges with industry, with other organizations. And so really having this panel gives you diversity of perspectives. In some of the studies we have done in the ecosystem, we've found that there's a lot of diversity, but there's not a lot of standardization, right? So there isn't a common approach and a common thread that can be run through. And I think that should be our goal as a community, is to find that common thread, that common set of standards that can really, everybody can adhere to. So that's my perspective.
And I'm just going to touch upon and ask you to expand slightly. So
Sure.
When we talk about building bridges, and a lot of what we talked about building bridges already this afternoon has been across external stakeholders. But I know that you and Randy are heavily involved as sort of tri-chairs on the Aviation Cybersecurity Initiative, which is trying to coordinate work across government. Mm-hmm. Now, being from ex-government, I know that's really hard. How is that sort of going from your perspective and the team's perspective on trying to coordinate work across government on such a complex and challenging topic?
So the ACI, which is the Aviation Cyber Initiative, we have instituted a governance structure. So I think what we have done is FAA Deputy Administrator serves on the XCOM for this initiative. We have a senior level folks from DHS and DOD. The goal really is to build a tri-chair structure where Randy, I, and Alan Burke from DOD, we kind of meet on a weekly basis. The goal is to build a communications plan, share information beforehand, talk very often, and have working groups that actually work on tangible real issues like UAS and cyber, or airports. Airports are a huge area for cybersecurity risk, and how do we sort of get our hands around all these airports which are different from each other, and each airport has its unique systems. So from a US government standpoint, we have come together, and DHS really leads the charge here in terms of the security agency in this country, but FAA is the aviation agency, so we have to work together on addressing the risks.
Thanks. And going now from effectively that global to that national to that operator level. And coming to you, Olivia, I mean, from an operator's perspective and trying to manage the cybersecurity of aircraft operations, how do you see all of this tying together from right effectively on the coalface?
One part that I really loved that came out in the report was the fact that culture was a strong thread that I saw from the beginning. And to piggyback something from Dr. Roper was that being competitive in security is not a priority. That is a downfall, and we can't do that. And I'm proud to say that I'm in an industry where we work with our competitors on a daily basis to share that level of information, and we have industry groups that help us to facilitate that. So we're continuing to grow from a cultural aspect, but it's not enough. And that was the other aspect that I appreciate, is that we can't stop. We have to continue to take that extra step further, especially from the technology aspect, because that's continuing to grow. And then on the vulnerability side, it's going to continue to grow on that aspect. And furthermore, when it comes to the people, we're going to be at a deficit. And coming from an operator perspective, we're so multifaceted in that it's not only just the technology, we also have the passenger aspect. We need to work with our regulators. Everybody up here is someone that we need to interface with. So we're going to need to grow in order to remain competitive and resilient.
But just expanding slightly, when you're talking about people at that stage, it's not just about bringing in cybersecurity expertise into the industry. How do you, from an operator perspective, increase the cybersecurity awareness of those already in operations for aircraft?
We need to be more open, is the bottom line. And something I'm personally trying to do is work with the research community via B-Sides conferences, open security conferences, just to say, hey, here's a high level of what aviation cybersecurity is. Here's the items that everything that can be found in the open is your starting point if you want to find more information. So starting with higher transparency and being more open is a good point.
Okay, so you've now gone from global to national to operator. And now, Eric, I'm going to come to you from an organization that's looking to build a lot of this hardware and actually drive a lot of this narrative, but also you're coming at this from both a CISO perspective and also with huge visibility of other sectors. So as you look across all of these demands, internationally, nationally, from the operators, how can you sort of take a lot of that learning and a lot of that perspective to really sort of change that narrative?
So one of the things that we can do, and it's interesting reading the report, there was a word that jumped off the page at me a lot, and then hearing the same word here a number of times is opportunity. Right? A lot of times we look at a report like this and hear all the things that could be wrong with the industry, wrong with the state of security, and it creates panic, but in reality we should be treating it as opportunity. And coming from a strong financial services background, they have a number of decades already with maturity in doing a lot of the things that I think we need to start doing here, which is the governance piece of it, starting at the ground up and saying, and we talked about what Dr. Roper was saying, having requirements built in to our suppliers, to our contracts to say, you must provide this level of security up front or we're not going to purchase from you. Right, and start to build those standards in. We've been doing it for years with operating systems, with firewalls, with routers. We've said, here are the baseline things that you must do in order for me to buy your product. We should be doing the same thing here with aviation components as well, right? And so driving that type of regulation up front should give us a vast amount of suppliers to buy from versus the opposite of what Dr. Roper was saying, where they're down to 2 suppliers for aircrafts, right? We should be able to give the guidance so that the people that are building, the companies that are building these components can do it to meet our standard.
But taking that point, if looking at the financial services as an example, and having sort of advised at that level before, is if the financial services sector is very much looking at compliance, and we're looking at audit, and we're looking at achievement of standards, how does that marry up with the heavy aviation focus on safety culture or cybersecurity culture, where we're constantly looking to manage and drive risk down as low as possible, or as low as practicable? How do we balance the need for regulation with the need for culture so that we don't become audit standards, just we've achieved the standard, that's it, we're done now? How do we stop that happening?
We don't want to create a check the box scenario. That's the worst thing that can happen. We want to have a scenario where we have the right guidance in place and the right things to do that we all believe. And so working with our suppliers, our partners, our operators to agree upon what these standards should be. So we're not just saying, let's create 100 requirements that everybody has to fill, and checking the box may not really give us any reduction in risk. And so really thinking through what needs to be there. We don't want to make security too hard, that people don't do it. We don't want to make it too easy that adversaries can take advantage of it. We have to find that balance so that there's value added with security.
And now we're starting to talk about risk. And Harley, I'm going to come to you because you're looking at the research community and risk across multiple different sectors, and aviation is just one of those sectors. And I worked with your team this year on aircraft cybersecurity vulnerabilities. From your perspective, looking across all of the different sectors and the challenges that the aviation sector is facing, how much difference is there really?
So I'm positive about the current relationship between the aviation sector and security researchers. I don't think it is that different from where cars or medical devices were maybe 5 years ago. It's just catching up, but it is changing, thanks in part to your leadership and the stars in this room, in this audience. But there is tension that is still there, that is higher, I would say, than in some other industries. Again, not necessarily different, it's just a matter of time, like where they are in their maturity. And I think that it comes down to the risks that researchers face and that the industry face. They're distinct, and when we focus on those risks, they are in conflict.
So one of the refrains that's been talked about a lot is researchers shouldn't be researching aviation. Researchers shouldn't be looking at that because that should be left to the industry. I mean, you've seen this through cars, you've seen this through medical. How do you see from the legal and sort of the perspectives of really allowing the researchers to assist and advise into this space? How can we help really drive some of that shared learning, not just from the research perspective, but also from the industry perspective?
So I'm glad that you brought up legal. So this is one of the big risks that researchers face. From a researcher's perspective, they are always in a race with the bad guys. They don't assume that they are the first ones to find a vulnerability. And so they feel urgency about finding the vulnerability, disclosing it, but then they face legal risks as well. Risk for doing the research, risk for disclosing the research. From the aviators' side, from the company side, they face risks from a highly regulated industry as well as a media that is willing to sort of jump onto sensationalistic stories, even when the sensationalism is not necessarily warranted. And cybersecurity and airplanes fits that nexus very well. Minimizing those risks for both sides and focusing on their common motivation, which is protecting people. Both airlines go to tremendous lengths to protect people, and for most security researchers that are disclosing in this area, we believe are doing it out of a motivation for protection, maybe a little bit of prestige on the side as well, but protection by and large. So focusing on processes that maximize that motivation and minimize things like legal risk as well as bad PR. Frankly, for both sides is the way to go. Vulnerability disclosure processes, which are talked about to a large extent in the report, are one good way of doing it. Bug bounties as a subset of that is another. The Aviation Village in DEFCON is a tremendous start. So again, I'm positive. I think it's changing through these various avenues. And it's just a matter of time, I think, before it becomes more open, because the truth is that every company needs to be in a place where they are prepared to accept vulnerability disclosures from unsolicited external sources.
Thanks. And Randy, I'm coming to you next, and sort of last, looking across the whole of this ecosystem from a DHS perspective. It's complex, it's challenging, multiple stakeholders with inherent risk throughout, and we're looking for resilience because we will have issues as we go forwards. How do you see the DHS role in this, and how do you manage a lot of that sort of stakeholder and that risk management?
Well, DHS has a lot of capabilities, specifically within the cybersecurity division, and what we're doing is looking at critical infrastructure and trying to address everything that we can to try to mitigate things that we find out about. For example, he talked about a vulnerability disclosure program. Our folks last year, I think, worked on 20,000 different disclosures, a huge number, trying to make sure that they get the researcher, whoever that is, with the company, get them married up and start working on the mitigation aspect and get that over and done with as quickly as possible. Some of the other things that we do within the aviation community specifically is we look at our CISA assessments. Our guys will go out, maybe do a validated architectural design review, maybe do some spear fishing, all of this at the request of someone to come in and try to assess their current state, if you will. We've offered that at airports. I continually work with airports and have a schedule for those guys. Have talked to the airlines about using that on specific things. The VADR, or the Architectural Design Review, is something that can be offered, and so far I've gotten thumbs up from everybody saying this is a superior product. The other thing that DHS does is after an incident, and nobody wants to talk about after an incident, but we do have our threat hunting division or group, and they can also be dispatched to help out critical infrastructure. Of course, when we talk about aviation is critical infrastructure that goes within the realm of what I'm trying to discuss. That's the DHS perspective, and I've got, I'll go back to ACI a little bit that my friend Sid touched upon. With ACI, we are trying to coordinate across government. We are trying to get, we're pulling industry in, we're making sure that they're in our community of interest. I love to use this, it's a team sport. You're not going to be able to do this by yourself, so we're trying to pull in more and more people. We are earning the trust. I won't say maybe we're there yet, but we're earning the trust of the community because I think people are seeing that we're just trying to do the right thing. Also with ACI, one other thing to point out, remember it's the whole aviation ecosystem. It started out as looking at an aircraft and specifically at that. National Strategy for Aviation Security came out this past year, and it says, hey, no, you need to look at the 6 A's, which includes, and I'll mess this up, airports, airlines, aircraft, airlift, actors, and aviation management. That's being the 6 A's. So between DHS and our outward look toward critical infrastructure, and with ACI and my partners at DoD and SID at FAA, I think we're addressing things, and I think we're making some strides. I won't quantify it yet.
No, I'll give a huge shout out to a lot of the efforts that the DHS team have made this year, especially the support around the village. And I did see Katie somewhere in the background, so massive thanks to the team there. So some of the efforts that community was making was to make sure that the right people were there to actually build those bridges, and that if something did come to light or come to the fore, that actually that vulnerability management process could be quickly worked through collaboratively and in the right manner. But I'm going to touch upon something that we've all sort of touched upon, which is when we talk about risk on aviation and against aviation systems and cybersecurity and vulnerabilities, one thing that came out a lot from the report was actually how much visibility have we got into understanding a lot of that risk, and actually the challenges between can we break down the stovepipes or the opaqueness between some of the stakeholders in seeing across safety, security, cybersecurity. Do we have the visibility into some of the technical systems themselves? There are black boxes on board aircraft that tell us where the engines are, where the flight controls are, what the displays say, to the extent of putting microphones into the cockpit, to the extent of listening to when the switch gets flicked. Have we got the same sort of visibility in cybersecurity of those systems to recreate and actually learn from some of those challenges? Are we there yet?
I take this, Pete, to start with. And you know this very well, and the people on this panel are in the Secretariat Study Group on Cybersecurity that we lead at ICAO. This is an ongoing discussion on where do we stand, what is the visibility that we have in the ecosystem. And I'm very happy you mentioned the silos. I think in cybersecurity, and we heard this in previous speakers as well, we have to break down those silos. Cybersecurity, only because it has the word security in it, is not the domain of security alone. It goes across the entire ecosystem. It involves our partners from safety, even though to efficiency and economics. It's really a cross-domain issue that we have to tackle with modern ideas in ways we have never attacked or tackled the system before in aviation. So we have to break down those silos, and we're not there yet. We have a long way to go, but we started. And I think we're also not there yet to fully understand how the ecosystem works. There are initiatives at the regional level, on both sides of the Atlantic, in determining the information flow in the aviation ecosystems, and it's a vastly complex exercise to do so. But I think globally and all stakeholders together, we can work on that. And we're never going to be at the end. It's an evolving and continuously evolving effort that we have to do. So we're going to keep our jobs for the next couple of years, I guess.
So I'm all about breaking down silos. I think one thing to understand is, breaking down silos also comes with culture change, right? So we are a safety-focused organization at FAA, but we also want to become security sort of focused. So part of what we are doing in AIT is changing some of that culture to also focus on security. So safety and security go hand in hand, and that's what should happen in cybersecurity. Is we need to understand that aviation is largely safety focused, but some of that culture change involves security as well. And so I think forums like this help in breaking down the silos, frankly, because we start to understand each other a little better as to what we're doing, what our job descriptions are, and then start that information and that dialogue. And that dialogue is really critical, I think, to breaking down the silos.
But picking that up, I mean, we've already talked this afternoon about the scale of the challenge and the complexity of the challenge, and from a regulator perspective, how do you match that scale and that complexity? Because from a safety perspective, we can already see some of the challenges that are out there from actually understanding some of the safety challenges when it comes to regulation. How do we approach that from a cybersecurity perspective to get ahead of those risks and increase that understanding when there's that scale?
That's a great question. I was going to actually say this earlier, but regulation is not the only tool in the toolkit, right? So rulemaking is one way that we deal with safety, but the FAA has a long history of solving problems collaboratively with industry through voluntary reporting, right? So if airlines come forward or manufacturers come forward with a problem, we work collaboratively on fixing that. And that's how we have had such a fantastic safety record in the US. And so it's not always the government telling industry what to do and penalizing. It's a lot of times what works better is us working together with industry on solving problems. So I think that's the same model we are thinking about in cybersecurity. I think voluntary reporting, voluntary sharing of information will go a lot longer, will go a long way. Having said that, sometimes regulation is needed and necessary. In fact, talking to some of the airports, they would prefer some rulemaking because that would elevate cybersecurity in their organizations and make it more of a priority for the airport management. But I think there's a wide range of tools in the toolkit. It's not just rulemaking, and I think we need to understand that.
And picking up on what you're saying there is that needing organizations to come forward when they've got challenges. From a safety perspective, the industry is used to that.
Right.
How do we drive that culture, that just culture, that culture of cybersecurity across the industry that can be really helpful? I mean, Olivia, you've been looking at some of that from your perspective.
Definitely. One thing I'm excited about is that myself and my industry partners out of the other operators, we're adopting aviation cybersecurity teams. We've identified it as a priority, and we're trying to bring in the people to help meet that need. But it goes back to the challenge of where do we have this base of knowledgeable individuals, and growing that trust, working with our regulatory partners as well. I remember the first time Sid and someone from his department sent me an email and said, "Hey, we're with the FAA and we want to talk about things, and we're not on the certification side." And it's just the change of dynamic of we're going to have more open conversations. So I welcome it. I look forward to doing additional conversations, but it's going to take time. Like Will said earlier, that we're not used to it, right? We're there in safety, we're not yet there in cyber, so we're going to need a lot of patience to get there.
But culture is a leadership thing. So culture has to be driven from the top down. So one of the things that is in the ICAO strategy is an absolute need for cybersecurity culture, so that irrespective of the starting point developing from a national perspective, we've got a strong culture across all of us. How do we really instill that internationally? How can we take some of this best practice and actually get it out internationally? I mean, you've looked at different sectors. Have other sectors taken on board this cultural approach, or is aviation got an opportunity to actually take a leadership position here?
I'd say the latter. I think that every sector is having this conversation about cybersecurity, whether it's health, automotive, software in general, and there is a recognition that security needs to be baked in from the start. Just like Dr. Roper was saying, it's not enough to build something and then look at security after the fact. It needs to be embedded from the very beginning. And I think that every industry is having this conversation. So yes, there's an opportunity there.
And I'll go again back to that conversation with Dr. Roper, is that we're talking about building new systems and making sure that we've got security baked in and proper risk management all the way throughout the design phase. But what about the older systems? We look across the aviation sector and there are systems out there that are 30 years old, if not longer. How do we protect those? How do we protect the second and third hand market? How do we make sure that we've got a good understanding of risk? Because it's a global sector, it's an international sector. How do we achieve that? And I'll open that up to the panel.
I'll take the first stab at that. Something that the airlines are actually working on together is to identify a list of risks on a handful of different use cases, and then whittle them down to see what's more realistic, where the priorities are, and then have actual data to back that up and go through those use cases. One way of doing that is through tabletop exercises. That's something that we actually do a lot. I'm the training and exercise lead, working group lead for the Aviation ISAC, so we make that a priority to have an exercise quarterly so that we can go through these risks, see what's realistic, and just get the conversation going of, is something that we thought was a risk, is that still currently a risk? And where's the data to back that up?
And one of the most fascinating conversations I've had when it comes to risk on aviation cybersecurity is when I asked a manufacturer and an operator, I said, who owns the risk of cybersecurity on this? Mm-hmm. And it came back as, well, we both do. It's like, okay, so from a legal perspective, who owns the risk? Where does this lie? How do we try and increase that understanding between all of those different stakeholders and the OEM perspective and the supplier perspective, and increase that trust, increase the dialogue, make it an open relationship? How do we achieve that?
I think it's difficult, right? Because what Dr. Roper mentioned previously is that if the requirements aren't written in there, is that going to happen? So I think we need to have more open dialogues with our suppliers and manufacturers to say, you know what, we need to do better, even though this is an after the fact and we don't have a requirement, and how can we move forward?
One of the other things I think we do a good job internally with our cybersecurity teams of doing risk assessments against our systems and our technology and our software, and we have a strong cybersecurity experience throughout that community. But one of the things that I don't think we have, because it's evolving, are those cybersecurity experts that are in the aviation piece that build these systems and support them. And so having better communication, better transparency to work with those teams, like Olivia just said, to do tabletops, to work together to do assessments where we don't necessarily have a good understanding of the technology and how it's built, and they don't have a good understanding of cybersecurity. If we bridge together, we could form a team that's able to do these assessments on existing technology, not just the new stuff, to be able to do assessments, identify risks, and then put controls in place to mitigate them.
But another bigger problem too is that everybody's doing their own individual testing. We need to put more of an effort to share that information. We don't need to recreate the wheel in certain aspects, right? If someone's doing it and we can share it, the concept was really interesting when Dr. Roper said, you know what, if the Air Force can self-certify, how can that be leveraged in commercial markets? That's a really interesting topic. Mm. So I could see that as being a point forward potentially.
But the aviation sector shares really well on safety. So why can't we share as well on cybersecurity issues? Surely that's something that we can really start to leverage across a lot of the sector. I mean, say from a regulator perspective, how do we promote that?
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. I think we have a fantastic safety record and we have that collaboration in safety. We can migrate some of those same models over to in the security area, but the problem is that, you know, when you think about everything from a safety standpoint, that's one standpoint, right? Now you're talking about changing your standpoint and talking about security, which is different, and so that's where the challenge is. And so changing that mindset, changing the culture, I think is going to be part of the whole process. And FAA is committed to using some of the lessons learned in the safety area in cybersecurity. But it's going to take time, like Olivia said.
And something we've actually been doing at American from tasking and strategy standpoint is we've identified we have over 18 internal customers when it comes to this ecosystem of aviation cybersecurity. And we're reaching out to each of them to say, where are your concerns, documenting the risks so we can have a better perspective of what the overall risk is, and working to break down those silos. And that takes a lot of time. I want to meet with each of them on a monthly basis. That means I'm going to be in nothing but meetings all the time. So it's hard, and it's just going to take time to figure out a long-term strategy.
But Harley, from a perspective from what you've seen from medical, there's again a huge crossover of safety and cybersecurity. They've gone through and are going through this maturity process. So what are those crossover lessons that the aviation can really try and pick up on?
Leadership from the regulators has really helped in medical. So from the FDA with their post-market guidance for medical devices on cybersecurity, that was something of a sea change in that industry for realizing that they needed to get very serious about cybersecurity for medical devices after they've already left the warehouse. And it's quasi-regulatory. It's falls a bit short of a straight regulation or a rulemaking, but that sort of clear guidance from regulators has actually been very, very helpful.
Okay.
You touched on a very valid point here. What complicates the things a bit in aviation, in my view, and looking at it globally, is the responsibility for cybersecurity is not always clearly defined within the regulatory framework of a state, where the U.S. maybe has a good mechanism to share this throughout their agencies. There are states where the end responsibility for cybersecurity does not sit with the aviation regulator. It's maybe with the military or Homeland Security. And that leadership from the regulator in aviation is especially complex because it's not necessarily the aviation regulator that has the authority and the responsibility to define that. And that's maybe also on an earlier question, what makes it a bit harder to share these things. For a lot of states, this is national security, this is sovereignty that it touches on. So to overcome that notion and to find a way to share this and not compromise their own identity, their own national security identity, that's a challenge that going forward needs to be addressed globally, and we hopefully can find a dialogue between states how to do that.
So from an ICAO perspective, this is about trying to use that national insight and those national initiatives to try and help drive the international piece.
Correct. I think we need to bring as many stakeholders at the table, and it's a dialogue. It's an informal dialogue often that helps. There are great initiatives out there in information sharing that are run outside the framework of international cooperation. I mean, Jeff Troy is here on the Aviation ISAC doing a great job expanding this beyond the North American realm. There should be similar activities that we should drive forward. We should create a forum where all the stakeholders, including nation states, can feel comfortable to share to a certain degree their lessons and their concerns. And we can certainly, at the ICAO level, foster this at the political level. But this is where it all starts. We need to create a forum where all the actors feel comfortable in to share.
And to do that, then hopefully we should be able to lower the barriers of entry, really, irrespective of starting position at a state level or an organizational level. But capturing best practice and developing that best practice, that's going to take people. That's going to take a lot of effort and time. How do we spark that how do we make sure that's a global dialogue and we don't lose this coherency? because it's an international industry, and when I speak to manufacturers, to a certain extent, they're wanting global regulation, they're wanting global alignment, so they can make one thing for every market. And operators want to be able to operate in a global market. How do we really keep that coherency? How do we keep showing that best practice?
Well, so ICAO, they have a whole study group on cybersecurity. So we had 5 people there last week in Montreal. I think they're taking the first steps, but I think the cyber is so big that it cannot be just a working group or a study group of whatever, 30 people. It has to be a whole organization that's kind of working this in the long term. And it's like 130 countries is what we're talking about. So it's a lot of different nation states, and the US has certainly a role there. And within those countries, we have industries and government. So it's a fairly complex endeavor. I think it starts with good governance at ICAO, sort of establishing how to manage cyber. And they're doing that. So
that's great to see. So I am going to open it out to the audience for some questions, and we'll just start bringing you in. So have we got an initial question now for the panel? Sorry, we'll just get. Sorry, 2 seconds. We'll just get you a mic. If you can just introduce yourself and then crack on with the question.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Frank Bart, I work with the Joint Staff, and one of the issues that we deal with our adversarial competitors are that they are operating at a whole of government type of level, which is easy for them because they are totalitarian, whereas they're specifically exploiting our weakness because we're very fractious and siloed. So what are you doing to bring that together, with the Department of Homeland Security and so on, to have like a joint interagency task force, not only to address cybersecurity, but as a whole? Because that's one of the areas that some of our adversaries have done to gain an advantage is cyber attacks have taken a tremendous amount of IP and continue to do that. It's about $500 billion a year that they steal in IP. A good portion of that is in cyber attacks where they steal design plans and intellectual property. Thank you.
So I'll just touch on that. So a lot of the focus that we have when we're talking here from an aviation cybersecurity perspective is talking about aircraft operations. It's talking about safe operation of aircraft, of aerospace. We were very careful not to really focus on what I would consider as enterprise IT. Although what's really coming out a lot of this is that there is increasingly no boundary between those systems, and they extend from the enterprise into operations out to the aircraft. So we've got to be really careful on how we sort of bound that. But when it comes to like interagency sort of cooperating, I'm going to hand over to Randy. And then you can talk more about the ACI.
Okay, yeah, well, that's why I'm here. Glad you asked. The Aviation Cyber Initiative was actually signed off by the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Transportation, and the Secretary of Defense this past spring. And between those 3 entities, we are trying to coordinate that government approach for the U.S. I'd love to chat with you at great length about it later. But it's an opportunity, I believe, to get our arms around the problems across the ecosystem. Maybe not intellectual property and those type of things, but as far as cybersecurity issues, we're addressing them. May not be as fast as people would like to see, but we are addressing them. We've got a plan. We are moving forward with the guidance of our executive committee, which includes one of the Deputy Assistant Secretaries of Defense over in the Pentagon.
So
Holly.
Encouraging a whole of government approach could start with reinstalling the cybersecurity coordinator in the White House and giving that office a team, mandate, and funding. That position was eliminated. We'd like to see it back for this very reason.
Okay. Sorry, next question.
Thank you. I'm Dave Rubinowitz. I'm retired. And I have 2 quick questions. First, ISO generates international standards for all sorts of operations in industry and otherwise. I'm wondering if anybody is trying to work with them about establishing cyber security standards in general and specifically for the aviation industry. And my second question is, yesterday in this room there was a big discussion about security and artificial intelligence. And I'm wondering if anybody's looking at applying artificial intelligence to this problem.
So we'll go for the second question first. So Andy, do you want to go and hit the second question?
No,
Andy.
Oh,
sorry.
Andy,
No,
thank
Randy.
goodness.
Did the artificial intelligence?
No.
No, please. Now we're stuck. See, it's got this Andy Randy.
That's all right.
I actually wanted to answer the first question, if I may.
Yeah,
But if you want to start with the second, we'll give it to. So the first question, ISO has standards. It's 2700 standard. It applies internationally. ICAO is looking at those standards, how they could possibly apply to aviation security or aviation cybersecurity, and we have different groups that are working with ISO to see how they could be adaptable and scalable. But that's work in progress.
And I'll stay away from the artificial intelligence, but I will talk about the fact, and I think Harley may have said it earlier in conversation, the vulnerability disclosure process actually has ISO standards that we follow. So we are following those standards and trying to work some of our own through NIST also.
Stole my thunder.
I'm sorry.
There are two ISO standards for vulnerability disclosure, so from the disclosing parties end as well as from the receiving entities end, and they apply pan-industry, so they would include aviation. They're not industry specific, but those are pretty well developed and in wide use.
And to give you a bit of insight is that we actually had those ready to go at DEFCON this year. So we had an entire back room team ready to go if somebody came out with something at short notice. So we could work through it using standard cross-sector methodologies, because we haven't really got the time as the aviation sector to reinvent the wheel. And if we look at the supply chain that we're all using, the aviation sector supply chain is sharing lots of commonalities across other supply chains. So the more that we can seek commonality, the faster we can move as an industry. And because nobody wants to take the AI question, I'll quickly take it and then maybe hand over. But from some of the work that's going on reference AI at the moment, we've got to be really, really careful, because fundamentally in aviation, we discuss the human as being the last link in the flight safety chain. Whatever we do with artificial intelligence, we've got to still enshrine that, from my perspective, in the whole of the system. So it can't be a point that a black box starts taking over decisions. It potentially uses decision support, but we've got to maintain that human element of making the decision. Because it's very easy to get lost in the VC language when it comes to the opportunities that AI may bring us. But we've also got to look at the flip side of AI, of how it can be attacked, how it can be compromised, and we've got to have that in the back of our minds so that we don't give ourselves challenges in the future. I don't know if we're better. Go for it.
The only thing that I was going to add to that, because AI to me is a level of maturity, and we're still talking right now about some of the foundational elements that we need to put in place. But I agree, we need to have the training and awareness out there so that when the time comes to implement AI, you're right that there's humans that oversee it. So when AI tells the aircraft to do one thing and the pilot who's been trained and has thousands of hours of flight says, no, this is not the right thing to do, that they can interject.
I'm very disappointed none of you have mentioned that the solution to aviation cybersecurity is quantum or blockchain. Just putting it out there. So another question from the audience, please.
Hi, Jacob Markish again from Thales. Picking up on my colleagues and everyone's mention of AI. Of course, we, like most of our peers, are looking at ways to incorporate AI into solutions. A lot of it's around advisory and insights rather than decision making per se. But my question is actually for the operator, which is to say, when something new comes along, some new widget, right, some new capability from a cyber perspective, how do you think about what drives you as an operator to make investments, right? I mean, at some point, you can't invest in every single capability, every single tool that's out there on the market. Are there triggers? Are there events? And it's also difficult to build an ROI around a particular tool, right? So how do you guys, what drives investment decisions for you?
Definitely from a standpoint of that, we just don't have enough resources and time to look at everything that's available. Our management has actually made IoT a priority from the standpoint of that's a point that we need to look at in my team. And we leverage the information sharing that we have through organizations like the Aviation ISAC, other third parties, research like the Atlantic Council to see what have others done previously. And if there's something that, if there's definitely like an IOC or there was an incident where we need to incorporate that type of technology, we're going to go forward. Safety is our top priority, and we never have a problem of pivoting in order to meet that.
Harley, do you want to just pick up on the previous points?
Just to caution, and I know that folks in the audience are aware of this, but that incorporating AI into these systems is going to introduce new security attack vectors, right? I mean, one of the pretty regular vulnerabilities that I've seen so far when it comes to aviation is confusing the system about the inputs, right? So that its altitude is different, or that its speed is different, its fuel level, and so forth. And to the extent that AI is in an advisory role, that feeds into this confusing the inputs that the AI is taking in order to provide the advice. So prior to integrating it, I would assume that it needs to go through rigorous security testing.
So one of the things that I talk about when it comes to aviation cybersecurity is I talk about the generations of attacks that we're going to be facing in the aviation sector. So for me, Gen 1 attacks against the aviation sector are going to be against availability. So is that system available? Is the data available? Can we see that weather data? Can we see where the aircraft is? And then confidentiality. We're already seeing that you can, across all of these open protocols that the industry are using, whether it's air traffic management or not, confidentiality of that data is really difficult. But that's Gen 1 attacks. When we start talking about what I call Gen 2 attacks, when we start affecting the integrity of data, that's an order of magnitude higher for an adversary to achieve. But the potential impacts are an order of magnitude higher as well. So we've got to be really careful as we move forwards with whatever technology we take forwards, that we are absolutely protecting the integrity of the data so that the operators responsible for safety can make safe, responsible decisions in a timely manner based on accurate information. That's the thing that we really have to enshrine, irrespective of what technology we take forwards. But I'm going to pick up on a point, and I'll open up to the panel, because it's taking that last line of questioning forwards is, how do we generate the right motivating factors to help the industry want to be better? How do we generate those motivations? It can't just be regulation. It can't just be saying you need to have a culture. One of the quotes from the report 2 years ago, when we asked somebody the question of what's it going to take for the industry to be better, the expression that they came back with was, it's going to take the factory over the road burning down before they buy a sprinkler system. How do we not be there? How do we really get the motivations going to make the industry want to be better? Because we've got all of the right ingredients. How do we really kick this off?
I would say a lot of it is around socialization of what we know, right? When we do vulnerability testing or penetration testing and we find things that are concerning, we should be open about it and clear, because that will make people pay attention, right? When the first couple of IoT devices came out, nobody cared that my light bulb could be a threat vector because it wasn't possible. Just like the quote you showed up in the report, aviation's unhackable, right? People thought that too. But there was a casino a few years ago that was compromised because the thermometer in their fish tank was connected to their production network, because the owner always wanted to make sure that his fish tank was at the appropriate level, appropriate temperature. And adversaries got in that way and ultimately onto the production system. So once you start making people aware that these connected systems can touch flight computers, can touch ground control and things like that, I think when you bring that awareness there, that makes people wake up. That's effectively the factory across the street burning down.
Right. And I think it's knowledge, it's awareness. You talked about culture change comes from the top down. The messaging has to go from the bottom up and educate those folks, so the message will then, or the culture change will come from the top down. So that's my thought.
That's good. Open to the audience again for a question. Cool. So I'm going to start sort of going through, looking at last comments from everybody, because we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone from a global, international, how do we lift up every nation, not just developed nations? How do we really start understanding those challenges globally and making a difference on those challenges globally? We've talked about leadership. We've talked right down to the technology level and the diversity of the stakeholders across the entire ecosystem, ranging from the researchers into the really high level of manufacturing and operators. How do we start, how do we really sort of manage this? And from your perspectives, what would you really like to see happen in the next, let's say, 2 years, because that's what the last report was. So, and whoever wants to put their hand up first for going first, but what do you want to see in the next 2 years across all of this ecosystem? Andy?
I think I might start here. Something that was discussed a few times. I would like to see that we attract the right talent in the aviation industry to deal with cybersecurity. We just started the dialogue here, but I think, as the Air Force said before, we need to make this the coolest job on earth. We need to get the people in. And I would like to see the industry, and this is my appeal to the industry here, to create an environment where those talent can actually work and is attractive for this talent. Too often, industry is constrained with financial constraints, what they can offer as a package to these people, and they'd rather go off somewhere else. So I would like to see the industry and appeal to the industry, the aviation industry, to create an environment where young talent can come in and build these bridges that you talked before, cybersecurity and aviation professionals, how we can create a workforce and see a workforce in place in 2 years that can take over our jobs.
Randy?
My thought is you know, when I read the original report, I go, this is awesome. It delineates everything. It's very clear. It is very meaningful to me. And I go, and of course I read it 2 years later, and I'm like, well, we've come a long way. I just want to see some progress there. You know, it's the continued progress. If you go back and you read the 2017 report, I think I don't want to say it was negative, but it was very, very clear that we weren't doing the things we're doing. We are communicating now. We have become that team, if you will, when you start looking at some of the collaboration that we're doing between industry and government and government. So if we keep that, nothing's fast enough for everybody, but you know, as long as we keep things moving forward, then I think it's well played.
I'm going to piggyback off of something that Andy said, because he took part of my answer, but it's okay. As you read through any of the metrics, one of the things that we see is that there is a massive shortage in talent in cybersecurity. I think the latest report I read said by 2021 there'll be over 3 million vacant cybersecurity jobs, right? And so one of the things I'd like to see is, as we are socializing this more and communicating this more, I would love to see schools start to develop more cybersecurity programs to start to give us more talent. Olivia said we have a shortage in headcount, and even if I had the budget to hire 20 more people, it might take me a year to find 20 qualified people. So having more of those people churned out so that they're hitting the industry and have this baseline and technical understanding will give us the ability to bring them in, train them maybe specifically on aviation, and then have a team member that could add value.
Continuation of what is already happening. So keep building bridges, seeing the Aviation Village at DEFCON expand to not only other conferences but also become more popular. I think it was a wild success last DEFCON. I expect it will grow this year as well. So I think that we're on a positive track. A big one will be vulnerability disclosure processes in individual companies. So not just trade groups, not just industry groups. Having it with industry groups is great, but the industry groups will ultimately defer to the individual companies. It is up to the individual companies that make up the aviation trade groups to have VDPs, vulnerability disclosure processes, in place. Boeing has set a great example by getting that started. I'd like to see more of that across the industry, as well as more success stories that come out. This is an overlooked angle a lot of times, and that is working with media to, as I said, diffuse that sort of sensationalism. This should be a happy story in the end. You know, researcher found a bug, they worked with the company, and now it's fixed and everybody is more secure. More stories like that, and that will take coordination not just with the researcher and the company, but also training the media not to over-report.
I'd like to build on something Harley said there about vulnerability disclosures. Recently, we have gone out with a binding operational directive. It's in a draft stage and it's out for comment right now. But it specifically is telling all the civilian organizations that they need to develop a vulnerability disclosure program across the federal government. I'm hoping that's leadership and others will follow that example.
And DHS deserves a lot of credit for that, actually. DHS, CISA is actually being terrific leaders on vulnerability disclosure processes for the federal government. And not every country is moving in that same direction. There are some that are sharply splitting in a much more restrictive direction.
Well, I would say what's been identified in the report, trust building, building bridges, I mean, that stuff takes time. So I don't know if 2 years is sufficient, but I think we should make some strides there. Coordination, collaboration, a whole of government approach, but also with industry and international organizations, that should really be a goal. It's hard to measure this stuff. You can't put a metric on trust building and say, we achieved so much trust building in 2 years, but I think the more we kind of collaborate, the more we exchange notes, the more progress we make as a community. And the real goal is if there is a cyber incident, everyone suffers, right? So there's nobody that's winning. So well before the incident happens, we have to kind of mitigate and work as a team. That should be our goal.
And Olivia, finally to yourself.
One thing I loved when I finished reading the report was, here's different areas of scope. What action am I going to take next that my company could take, that operators, that members of industry could take? So I know one thing that American recently has done is created a coordinated disclosure program. We're in our pilot phase right now, and we're hoping to have it public sometime in 2020. I know we're not the only ones. A lot of them have bug bounty programs as well, but also coming up with strategies on training. I'm looking forward to the opportunity with working with my Aviation ISAC members to see what are we going to do to go forward to help close that gap, because it's everybody's responsibility. And not only to bring the next batch of individuals into the community, but also leveraging the people we already have. I'm a huge proponent of having more open conversation with the research community. I think that's still an untapped area, and my goal for 2 years would be that if you have another survey, that the research community would say, we finally listened, that we finally opened up to the extent that they don't feel like they don't know who to go out to when it comes to vulnerability disclosure programs, and that they have the knowledge they need to make informed decisions.
Fantastic. Everybody, thank you. That was an amazingly diverse conversation with some really great information and leadership in there. So, and I really look forward to where that goes forwards across all of those different stakeholders, including yourselves. So thank you very much. Everybody, that's the end of the program. I think it's been an amazing afternoon. We've learned more information. We've seen some amazing initiatives. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being online. This is certainly an initiative that's going to be carried on and hopefully grown, and look forward to seeing where it will go in the future. So thank you very much to all the panelists, and thank you very much for all the speakers, and best of luck going forward. Safe travels. Thank you.